Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Neil Cox. I'm an associate professor here at the University of Reading in the English Literature Department, and I'm going to talk to you today about a kind of an idea in what we call kind of theory, which I guess is kind of like thinking about literature, but also thinking about arts, thinking about philosophy, thinking about um, yeah, theorizations of what it means to kind of read, what it means to have an identity, theorizations about history. Okay, and what I'm essentially talking about is this idea of the gaze. And I guess if you have heard of the gaze at all, um, and no worries if you haven't, but if you have, you've probably encountered it through the idea of like the male gaze. It's this idea, isn't it, that like there are certain kind of ways of looking uh, that kind of benefit or are made for male viewers, that kind of normalize male viewing. That certain ideas, like in cinema, for example, or in art, certain kind of pictures or certain films that presume the person that's watching or looking is a man. And the male gaze is often, but not always, kind of linked to ideas of voyeurism. It can be very intrusive. And more often than not, it's not asked for by the people that are subject to it. Basically, the male gaze is often quite an aggressive kind of looking uh, that doesn't really engage a female audience. And this idea of the male gaze was kind of developed in cinema theory in the 1970s. And the person's that most famous for it is a woman called Laura Mulvey. She's an incredible academic. A couple of years ago, one of the things that University of Reading does, just one of the many things it does so well, is it encourages really kind of big name speakers from all over the world to come and talk to us and kind of enlighten us. And a couple of years ago, I was very happy to go and see Laura Mulvey herself do a talk at Reading. And I was just really blown away by it. And I definitely think that what Mulvey is talking about is in so many ways a kind of a really kind of productive diagnosis of kind of the sexist nature of quite a lot of movie making. You might have also heard of the kind of the reverse of the male gaze that is emerging, and that's the female gaze. That's quite often, I mean, Fleabag is the most obvious one, the TV show. It's when films or kind of artworks, they kind of recognize female agency. They assume there's going to be a kind of a female audience. They try to represent female looking and female desire. Okay. The gaze I'm talking about today is nothing to do with those gazes at all. Yeah. It's got the same word, but actually it's a totally different thing. It's a lot weirder. It's very counterintuitive. When you think about it, it doesn't really make sense. It shouldn't really work. The gaze I began talking about, whether it's a male gaze or a female gaze, is a kind of an active gaze. It's about someone looking at us. It's the idea of me kind of looking out of the screen at you. It's the idea that the gazer is someone that's in charge. They're doing things. The gaze that I'm talking about is a very different kind of gaze. If we can move on, slide. The gaze I'm talking about is a very different kind of gaze. It's a gaze, just seeing if the slide, that's great. It's a gaze that's not active, that's not kind of doing. In fact, it's a gaze that's a kind of absence. And this is just a picture of Laura Mulvey's book, Visual and Other Pleasures, which is all about the active male gaze. That's not what I'm talking about. Could I have the next slide, please? That'd be great. Okay, so I'm going to go about this in a rather kind of peculiar way, in a very kind of oblique way. And I'm introducing this weird gaze, this counterintuitive gaze, this kind of weirdly absent gaze. And I'm going to do it not by talking initially about the gaze at all. I'm going to talk about the ending of a children's story, and it will allow me to kind of talk about narration, storytelling, because the gaze that I'm going to try to explain is wrapped up with an idea of perspective. And if I can kind of get you a sense of the weirdness of perspective, then I can set up to actually really talk about the gaze. Anyway, the story I'm talking about is 1906 by E. Nesbit. It's called The Railway Children. You might, over the winter holidays, sometimes you might see the old film of this on the TV. It's definitely worth a look, worth a gaze. What's the plot if you haven't read it? Well, basically, there's these three kids. They've got a mum and a dad. The dad goes to jail for a crime he didn't commit. The family has to downsize, moves to the country with their mum, and through a series of adventures, they work out a way to exonerate their dad. And the oldest of the children, Bobby, who's the most active and clever in making a case to free their dad because he's actually innocent, meets him at the station, and no one else knows he's been freed. And the two of them have a very emotional kind of meet up, and then they walk back to the house they've been living in, and all the family is together for the first time. And very problematic to think about these things in this way, but in this text the idea is that this is somehow a kind of a whole family, and they're kind of complete at the end. And this is how the ending goes. And now I see them crossing the field. Bobby, remember that's the older daughter, goes into the house, trying to keep her eyes from speaking before her lips have found the right word to tell mother quietly that the sorrow and the struggle and the parting are over and done, and that father has come home. I see father walking in the garden, waiting. He's looking at the flowers, and each flower is a miracle to eyes that all these months of spring and summer have seen only flagstones and gravel and a little grudging grass. But his eye keeps turning towards the house, and presently he leaves the garden and goes to stand outside the nearest door. It's the back door, and across the yard the swallows are circling. They're getting ready to fly away from the cold winds and keen frost to the land where it's always summer. They're the same swallows that the children built the little clay nest for. Now the house door opens. Bobby's voice calls. Come in. Daddy, come in. He goes in, and the door is shut. I think we will not open the door or follow him. I think that just now we are not wanted there. I think it will be best for us to go quickly and quietly away. At the end of the field, among the thin gold spikes of grass and harebells and gypsy roses and St. John's Wall, we may take one last look over our shoulders at the White House, where neither we nor anyone else is wanted now. Could we move on to the next one? So where to begin with this? Look, if I were enough time and to go through this, I could talk about this ending literally for 24 hours. It's such a complicated, dense and exciting bit of writing, even though it seems to be in really simple language. But I just want to start with this. Now the house door opens, Bobby's voice calls, come in, Daddy, come in. Well, what's the perspective here? Well, the storytelling isn't from the perspective of Bobby, is it? Because Bobby's mentioned. Yeah. And it isn't from inside the house. The storyteller has only a kind of a limited access to the information here, don't they? Yeah. In fact, actually, it's not Bobby calling out, come in, Daddy, come in. It's only Bobby's voice. At this stage, the perspective, the narrative, it's almost as if they're not fully in contact with Bobby. And in fact, Bobby isn't there at all. Bobby is only there in the ownership of her voice. And it's that voice alone that's saying, come in, Daddy, come in. We can have the next slide. This is a bit before that. And now I see them crossing the field. Bobby goes into the house trying to keep her eyes from speaking before her lips have found the right words to tell Mother quite quietly that the sorrow and the struggle and the parting are over and done, and that Father has come home. Now, there's lots of little things here that, again, if I had more time, I could work through. One of them is there seems to be something about the body being in bits, doesn't there? Like the voice and the lips and the eyes. But what interests me here now is at the start, and now I see them. The narrator, the perspective, is kind of a distance from Bobby and her father. But the perspective is kind of there because it can actually see them at the moment. So at this point, it's not like when Bobby's voice called out from inside the house, because there the narrator couldn't see Bobby at all. In fact, there was no Bobby, there was just an ownership of a voice. At this point, the narrator can see them. But more than that, the narrator also knows that when Bobby goes into the house, she's trying to keep her eyes from speaking before her lips have found the right words. So even though this starts with the narrator kind of like set apart from Bobby and her father and looking at them, and they're available to the narrator's vision, the narrator can also kind of go beyond vision and can know exactly what Bobby is trying to do. The narrator knows her hidden intentions, don't they? And again, this is so different from when Bobby calls out towards the end in the house, because the narrator not only doesn't know what Bobby is thinking or trying to do at that time or intending, the narrator has no access to Bobby at all. It's just this voice. If we can go on. I see Father walking in the garden, waiting. He is looking at the flowers, and each flower is a miracle to eyes that all these months of spring and summer have seen no flagstones. Well, I'm going to jump over this a little bit, but again, we can see Father, but we can not only just see Father, and Father is Father here for the perspective. Yeah, Bobby's her first name, Father's Father. You can see how the perspective is positioned in a certain way in relation to these people. But it's not only that the perspective here can see Father, it also knows what Father is doing, what is he's intending, he's waiting. And he is looking, and we actually get insight into what Father is looking at. Each flower is a miracle to eyes that all these months have seen over spring and summer. We can go on, next one. But this is how it ends. He goes in, and the door is shut. I think we will not open the door or follow him. So there's a we here. It's not just the narrator that's sort of standing around and looking at these things. There's someone else as well. But there's a difference because it's the narrator that does the thinking. And what the narrator thinks is about something that's not going to happen in the future. We're not going to open the door or follow him. I think that just now, only now, just at this moment, we are not wanted there. I think it would be best for us to go quickly and quietly away. We haven't quite done that yet, but we will. And at the end of the field, among the thin gold spikes of grass and the harebells and gypsy roses and St. John's Wall, we may, maybe not, but we may, just take one last look. A look that in a way never quite happens in the narrative, because it's what's going to happen later after the narrative is finished. But in the future, according to the narration, we must take one last look over our shoulders at the White House, where neither we nor anyone else is wanted now. That now is different from the first now here. That now is a now that seems to go on forever. Neither we nor anyone else is wanted now. Here's the thing. Here's where I wanted to get to. Okay. Why is it that the perspective doesn't follow Bobby and her father into the house? Kind of why wouldn't that quite work as well? Well, we've already seen that when Bobby and her father, if we can go back just one second. we can see, when we look at father, yeah, his eyes keep turning towards the house and then back to where we were just before. Yeah. We've got the idea that like people are in kind of little bits. We can follow their eyes. Everyone's kind of broken down into little bits, and people are voices. They're not themselves. We've got the idea of people looking at each other and seeing each other, and the narration kind of talks about all that. But the thing about Bobby and her father, even though they're kind of bonded just before they go into the house, they're also kind of divided from each other, because we know what they're thinking, and what they're thinking is different from the other one's thinking, and we know what they're seeing, but what they're seeing is slightly different from what the other people are seeing. Yeah. When the people are narrated, when the people are talked about, and Bobby and her father are talked about, they're kind of different. And if we followed them into the house, this third person narration, my guess is even if it talked about their absolute kind of togetherness as a family, it would still say something like, Bobby looked at her father and she was overjoyed, and her father turned and looked at Bobby and his eyes looked at Bobby and his heart swelled, and all these things. What that would suggest is actually the difference of the characters as much as their togetherness. They would be being viewed from a third person perspective, and that third person's perspective, which isn't quite their own perspective, it's a perspective on them, couldn't help but emphasize their difference. How do you get the sense instead that actually the family is all together, that it's complete, that it wants nothing? Well, first of all, the family has to get out of sight. If they're out of sight, then it can't really be the third person narration that's talking about them. They're on their own. They don't need anyone. If the narration doesn't follow them into the house, then there is a sense that the family want nothing. They're private. They're kind of kept apart. They're whole. And the narration of them isn't kind of riven and different. But there is an irony here, isn't there? Because that means that the complete family can never be narrated from the sight of the complete family. In order to get a complete family, what has to happen is that there needs to be something in the way, something that stops us seeing the complete family. The separation of the family, their independence, can't be narrated from inside the house, because they wouldn't quite be independent anymore. They would be narrated by the third person, they'd be split and they'd be riven. So we have to remain outside the house. And that means that the complete family, and this is the point, is a perspective on a house. The complete family that wants nothing is someone else's perspective on a door. Think about that for a second, because it's really strange. If I said I'm going to draw you a picture of a complete family, you'd expect some folks, wouldn't you? Some sort of people there together, maybe a dog or whatever. Yeah, that's what you'd expect me to draw. But if I just draw a door and I said that's a complete family, you would think, what on earth is Neil going on about? Yeah, if we can have the next slide. The way I quite often explain this is through Frozen. In fact, I've written a piece that is exactly about this. In Let It Go, what's that song about? It's about like Elsa getting independence, isn't it? The lead character in Frozen. She's been kind of looked upon and controlled by her parents all these years. They're always kind of invading her privacy. They're always telling her what to do. And the song starts her kind of like quite depressed and on her own and feeling isolated. But as she sings the song, that isolation turns into kind of independence. And as she lets it go, as she kind of comes out, yeah, as a proud frozen magic user, yeah. And she builds this amazing ice palace to live in, and she puts on this amazing frock, yeah, okay, and she's like happy and proud of who she is, and she doesn't need anyone else anymore. Okay, how does the film narrate, tell the story of her independence? Well, the song ends, doesn't it, with her saying, "The cold never bothered me anyway." Yeah. And the next shot is this, if we can go into the next one. Bam. Yeah, the door's closed. She's in her ice palace. Why can't we follow Elsa into? You can see where we're going, can't you? Why can't we follow Elsa into her ice palace? Well, if the narration followed Elsa into the ice palace, yeah, what would happen is there would still be a perspective on her. If what happened, instead of closing the door, she said, "The cold doesn't bother me anyway," and she sort of went inside and then was kind of rocking out and being really kind of happy and independent inside, we would still be seeing independent Elsa from a perspective other than her own. The camera would still be there. Elsa wouldn't really be independent because someone else would be looking at her and framing her as independent. The whole point is that Elsa doesn't need to be looked at anymore. So I'm just moving my desk. Got it. Okay. Elsa doesn't need to be looked at anymore. Yeah. She's free from the gaze of other people. So how are we going to communicate that freedom, that independence, that, you know, need not to worry about anyone else? Well, what happens is the perspective stays on the other side of the ice palace. There's something in the way. And we know that beyond that door, Elsa's being independent, but she's so independent, we can't see her being independent because she's independent. Okay. But when you think about that, it's very strange. If we can go back to the other one, please. When we think about that, it's very strange. Yeah. Because that means that Elsa's independence is a door. This is a shot of independent Elsa. But Elsa's not even in the shot. There is no Elsa. In fact, independent Elsa is not just a door, it's a third person perspective on a door. How strange is that? You know, I'd love my independence. I want a bit of independence. I want to be my own person. Yeah. And if someone offered me, you know, great independence and freedom from everyone else, I would say, yeah, let's do that. Let's have a go at that. But if when I got it, I disappeared and just someone else, yeah, was looking at a door, you'd feel you'd feel shortchanged, wouldn't you? Yeah. If your kind of independence was just some other person looking at a door and it had nothing to do with you at all, you've disappeared from the narrative. I don't know. This might resonate with some of them, just some people, depending on what your example is. But the thing this also really reminds me of is An Easy Passage by Julia Copus. You know, the poem that some of you might have done, but it's a poem about a young girl, yeah, locked outside her parents' house, her mum's house, and jumping through a window, and it's this kind of heroic narrative. Um, and I guess what people often say about it is it's about a young girl kind of freeing herself from a kind of a patriarchal gaze, a sort of society's gaze, and becoming kind of heroic and independent. But what happens in the end is that someone's looking at her and being all judgy about her, and then she jumps through the window, and that's her victory. But that means that her kind of heroism, her kind of victory, her kind of independence, the young girl's, is her disappearance from the narrative. If what it takes for someone to be independent is for them to disappear momentarily from the narrative, yeah, or disappear forever from the narrative in terms of the easy passage. What kind of independence is that, and will we be satisfied with it? Okay, so we can go through the next one. Okay, so when I'm kind of thinking about this, just before we finally get to the kind of the question of the gaze, what we're thinking here is a very kind of ancient idea, actually. It's the idea that to create a sense of kind of independence, to create a sense that there is a reality that the text can't actually get to, that there actually is a full and complete family behind the door without any lack, the idea that there is a completely independent Elsa just partying on her own, you know, there. The only way to really get that sense of reality is to introduce an impediment, is to introduce something in the way. Yeah, and there's a very, very ancient story about this. So there's in ancient times in Greece, yeah, there are two painters, and they're just really, really good. And they're really good because they're realist painters, and they decide to have a competition who can do the best art. And this one artist, he paints, and his painting is so good, he decides to do some grapes, yeah, and there are these birds flying overhead, yeah, and one of them clocks the painting, yeah, but he doesn't realise it's a painting because he thinks they're actually grapes, and all the birds swoop down and they start trying to eat the grapes, and they hurt their little beaks because they're painted grapes, yeah, they're not real grapes, and everyone's just like, oh yeah, game over, that's amazing, you know, that's surely the best art ever. And the guy that's done the art, he's kind of like all full of it, and he wants to be nice in victory, so he looks at the poor bloke that is clearly beaten, and he says, look, I've heard you're a really good painter, yeah, it'll be really good to see your art, I'm sure it's really, really good. And the dejected kind of loser just sort of points over to a wall, where there's a curtain, you know, he's put the painting behind a curtain, and the victory painter goes to have a look, and he grabs it, the curtain, and he can't get hold of it because it's a painted curtain. Curtain guy wins. What's the message here? What's the meaning of that ancient story? Well, it's often interpreted in this way. If you want to create something that seems real, you only go so far in kind of putting it out there, in doing the grapes. That can act as a lure to nature. Yeah, it can fool animals, but that's as far as it goes. If you really want to create a sense of the real, if you really want to create something that seems absolutely real and independent and existing, you need an impediment. You need something in the way. The thing that's stopping you seeing makes you think that there is something real beyond it, and that can even fool the greatest artist. And at this point, I can turn to the gaze. Look at this wonderful picture by Anthony Brown, the children's artist. Have a look at that chimp, yeah? Look at it, yeah? It's surely looking at you, yeah? Have a look at it, yeah? It's fixing you with its gaze, isn't it? It's almost like, if you look at those little eyes there, it's almost like they're burrowing out of the picture right at you. Yeah. But of course, the chimp is not looking at you. And that is, of course, because it's a painted chimp and there is no staring coming out. But you could almost say it's the same with me if I look at you. Yeah. I'm a real person. Yeah. But the thing is, it seems like my gaze is coming out of the screen at you. It seems like the chimp's gaze is coming out at you. But certain theorists of the gaze, the theorists that are kind of against the idea of kind of Laura Mulvey and the male gaze, where the gaze actually is something that comes out of men's eyes and kind of fixes and controls women, A counter way of thinking about this, a counterintuitive way of thinking about this, is actually there really is nothing coming out of the chimp's eyes. In fact, there is one thing that you definitely can't see here. For sure, you can't see his little feet, can't see the back of his head, but you also cannot see what the chimp is looking at. When you look at the gazing subject, when you look at the chimp gazing at you, there is something that you cannot see, and that is the chimp looking back at you. So actually, that sense of the chimp gazing at you is actually your inability to see something in the picture. Rather than the sign of a kind of a presence, a kind of inner consciousness, an inner will that's coming out the eyes and fixing you because it's looking right at you. Yeah. Instead of that, there is the idea that this is simply something, a picture in which there is something you can't see, something kind of hidden. Just as when we look at the door, it gives us the illusion that there is an Elsa behind it. And that makes us think, this really difficult position where Elsa's independence is actually someone else looking at a different object that's not Elsa. Just as the complete family is the inability of the narrator to see past the door, which gives us the sense that there is something outside, something beyond the door. In the same way, our inability to see what is held within the eye, the inability to actually see what is here, gives us the idea that something is there. Rather than an active seeing, what the gaze is, an active seeing of another, of someone else looking at us, what the gaze actually is our own inability to see. Think about that. If I look at you, the idea is, if I gaze at you, if I fix you with the gaze, the idea is that inside of Neil, there is a kind of a consciousness, a warm humanity. There is a person behind here. And that person is concentrating all of their energy out of their eyes and fixing you. Instead, certain theorists will say all of that idea of an inner Neil is an illusion based on your own inability to see something. My innerness is your inability to see something. My activity is your inability to see something. Let's go on to the next one. We see this all the time. I really like this one. This is from the beginning and the end of the Gruffalo, isn't it? A colleague I worked with for many years in children's literature, Sue Walsh, used to say about the Gruffalo that it was a kind of ecological text in a sense, because as you open the cover, there's the picture of the wood with nothing else in it, just a couple of animals. And at the end, it's the same picture. And it's almost like that whole story of the Gruffalo and the fox and the snake and all the rest of it. It doesn't change anything. But this is one of the little guys that's, on that fly as you open it up at the beginning and end of the story. And why I like this is this guy's fixing me with his gaze as well. This is definitely, the butterfly is definitely looking at me. Okay. With the Anthony Brown, because it's in such a kind of realist style, you can't help but think, we're being fixed by the gaze. But here, the eye is just like a strange squashed circle with a dot in it. There really is nothing here about the idea of something generating a look out at me. This really is about my own inability to see what the butterfly is seeing. And that impediment, that thing in the way, like the door, that difficulty of getting inside the butterfly's head or the butterfly's vision, that sense of being barred from what the butterfly is seeing, weirdly inverts, and it becomes evidence for us that there is such a seeing, that my own inability is translated into its own activity. Now, these sort of theories of the gaze, they were kind of sort of summed up by a guy, well, lots of theorists of the gaze actually in the 20th century, but the one that I'm kind of using here is based on a guy called Jacques Lacan, who was a sort of a theorist and psychoanalyst, kind of influenced by Freud, this French guy. Okay, and his work is notoriously very, very difficult to read. He's trying to make us question kind of familiar ideas of kind of sense making, and part of what he kind of does is he kind of makes up stuff, and a lot of the things he says is kind of like just nonsense. But one of the things he argues here is that, like, imagine if, and this is based on nothing, but imagine if, you know, there's a forest, yeah, and in the forest there's a predator, a mouse or something, and the predator is hunting and eating insects. One of the things the insects could do in defense is have those kind of big eye spots on their wings. Yeah. So just as when the predator is going to get it, they open up the wings, it looks like something is looking back at the predator. And what Jacques Lacan says about that is that only works if the predator is looking for those spots. If the predator is invested in those spots, if the predator is seeing those spots as eyes, because if you haven't got eyes, you know, of that kind, if you're not used to those kind of predators, they just look like spots of color, don't they? In other words, the gaze, when this guy is looking back at me, when I find I can't help but look at those eyes, I can't help but have a kind of a fascination for that gaze that's kind of coming my way. Even though it is a hole in my own vision, even though it is precisely based on the idea that I cannot see what this guy is seeing. Yeah. That comes from me. The gaze is not something that comes from other people. And not only because it's a hole in my vision, but it's a hole in my vision that appears because I'm fascinated with something. It's my fascination, just as it's the investment and fascination of the little mouse looking at the spots that makes it think it's eyes. That's all it coming from its own fantasies and framing and kind of looking. Yeah. The gaze is not independent of us. The gaze of the other, according to this theory, comes from us. And it comes from us as a whole, as our own inability. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. What I've been talking about is, okay, the first thing about what I've been talking about is I don't agree with it at all. I find this theory of the gaze absolutely fascinating, and I've published quite a lot of work on it, talking about the way critics that use this kind of stuff talk about, for example, Hitchcock, and talk about the gaze in cinema theory. And I'm very interested in kind of subverting those ideas. My own sense is that, well, for example, the idea of like people being fascinated by the gaze only works if you're fascinated by the gaze. What if you're interested in noses? I know it sounds a silly thing to say, but actually there is a lot that goes unread and assumed about this idea of the gaze. And I think it normalizes pictures too much. It suggests they've only got one moment of crisis in them. I see pictures as complicated and readable all over. Yeah, but what I want to get here is the idea that these seemingly very complicated theorists can be explained very well, I think, just by talking about kids' books. Yeah. Often I think we try to turn to kind of really complex literature for complexity. In fact, I think we can turn to kind of Frozen and the Gruffalo to really kind of understand and work through some really difficult things. You've had my explanation of it. This is what kind of the theorists of the gaze, those influenced, like theorists influenced by Jack Lacan, say about it. Slavoj Žižek, very controversial and rightfully, in my view, controversial figure, is someone that I don't personally agree with at all, says this: we only see something insofar as X eludes our eye and returns the gaze. What a fascinating thing to say. One of the implications there, isn't it? And just let this kind of lodge with you and mull it over and think about it. Zizek's there saying we only see because there's something we don't see. Our vision is always, in one sense, about something eluding our vision. There is something missing from our seeing, and that's what makes our seeing. Yeah. This is what Joan Kopchak, who works very closely with Slavoj Žižek, says about it. When you encounter the gaze of the other, you meet not a seeing eye, but a blind one. The horrible truth is that the gaze does not see you. So if you're looking for confirmation of the truth of your being or the clarity of your vision, you're on your own. The gaze of the other is not confirming, it will not validate you. In the last kind of 2 minutes, I just want to kind of draw out one of the implications for that. Again, these are not people that I personally agree with, but I can see some really interesting implications. And actually, what Žižek and Kopchak are really, one of the things they're really motivated by is a real suspicion of the kind of the human move to try and find validation in other people. So much of the time in life, don't we? We kind of look for others to work out who we are. If I only know what people think of me, then maybe I can be a bit like that and people will love me, people will respect me, and I can be kind of happy. It's the idea that we can only be fulfilled if we kind of find someone else that will validate ourselves. Žižek and Kopchak really kind of argue against that. They really sort of say, actually, you're kind of on your own. Yeah. Don't look for validation in others. Don't look for validation in authority. Don't look for validation in, wider structures in the world, in the state, or in heroes, or, in music or art or anything else. Yeah. You're never going to be completed by that other thing. Instead, be determined. Be yourself. Find out what weird things are constitutive of you. Acknowledge there's something missing, yeah, but acknowledge that it's something that makes you who you are and unique and on your own, and celebrate that. Okay, I think we might have time now for any. I can answer any questions if anyone has any, and they can be about the gaze, they could be about kind of other stuff. There is for anyone that's interested, if you want to know more, if you want to explore kind of English literature at the university, we've got a code for that. But also, if you'd like to visit us and talk to us here at the university more about all of our specialisms and interests, and also about your interests as well, and seeing they chime together, click on, yeah, and it will be wonderful to see you soon. Okay. But again, if anyone is free to ask any questions, that'll be great, and I can answer anything. It doesn't have to be about the gaze, but it could be. Who knows?
Fabulous. Thank you so much there, Neil. We have had a couple of questions in, but just a quick reminder to everybody on the call, there is a question section within the webinar. Please do feel free to ask questions. Nobody else will be able to see them. They are anonymous. It's only myself that will be able to see them, and then I will ask them across to Neil. But we will get started on a couple of the more generic ones, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So we do have some about the kind of subject that you've gone on, you've talked about today, but there are a couple just generic ones. So the first one is talking about kind of the facilities that are offered within the English Literature department at Reading. So would you like to explain to the guys about that?
The facilities in
So they asked what kind of facilities we have at the University of Reading for students studying English literature. So obviously we've just had a brand new £40 million renovation of our library, which has over 1 million physical books. And then I know within the English Literature department, you've kind of got some study areas as well, don't you?
Well, I think the first thing to say that something that really makes English literature at Reading is one of the many things that makes it kind of like special. Yeah, is that we have access to completely unique archives. We're not alone in this, you know, but we are one of not many universities that has our own archives. So we've got the largest Samuel Beckett archive in the world. We've got an emerging archive on James Joyce. We have publishers' archives because we're really interested in kind of book history and the history of the material books. So look, Mathwell archive. We've got an amazing archive called the African Writers Series archive, which charts how Nigerian writers negotiated putting their writing and publishing it for a European and a British kind of audience. A fascinating area of study. We've got a huge children's literature archive that I work on quite extensively. And the thing about all these archives, there's many more, is that in second and in third year, and including the dissertation, we encourage our students to engage with this stuff. So there is something really amazing about encountering material that no one else has ever read or engaged before. We teach you how to synthesize this, we teach you how to work with this and actually produce something that's entirely original. It's really exciting. And just working in the archive is like, I feel like I'm a proper academic when I'm in the archive. It's absolutely amazing, and you don't have to wear white gloves. It's great. I think
That's
also
great.
I love just being in the department. We're always present. We're always around. Our doors are always open. We've got comfy offices, and we are a kind of community here. And students have their own study space. The study space is like 3 steps away from where we are. Yeah, our individual doors. And if students need help, they knock on the door and we help.
So you've got quite a few questions that have come in now, Neil. So I'm just going to go through them.
Yeah.
You genuinely have quite a lot of questions come in. I apologise for me taking a little bit too long. So the first one is somebody who has already met you, and they say, "Hello, I spoke to you at an open day last year. Can I ask, is there a children's literature module within the degree course, and is there an option to write children's literature within the creative writing joint programme?"
Both.
They've also said the gaze kind of gives me Franz Kafka vibes. If this is studied further in the course, does it look into classical texts such as post 1900s?
Yeah, let's do this first. I mean, the great thing about the gaze, the difficulty of the gaze is it's so applicable. There's a danger that it becomes overgeneralized, but absolutely, gaze theory can return to all the literature we teach. There is a dedicated third year module on children's literature. I've taught it since I've been here. It's incredibly well established, and it's a very popular and exciting course. In that one, we do 20th century children's literature, but there is kind of options for further study as well. Dissertations, yeah, the eight word, in fact, 8,000 words, but it ends up in 10,000 words because you have to do another kind of little bit of writing with it. Piece of writing you do in as your kind of final submission can be about children's literature, and children's literature is often, you know, it's a popular choice with creative writers for their creative writing dissertation. I've read some amazing work by our students that have been fully supported by our creative writing team to come up with original, spooky, exciting and wonderful fiction. And it's such a privilege to read it.
Fabulous, fabulous. Thank you. Another question is somebody who is interested in English literature, but they said, do you have any advice for somebody who is particularly interested in the English literature but studying Irish literature? Do we have any modules on that?
Oh yeah, we got one of the things about having kind of, I don't know what came first really, our kind of specialism in Irish literature or our archives, but because we've got the largest collection of Samuel Beckett writing in the world, Irish writing is kind of really kind of central to much of our work. We've got amazing academics that specialise in that area. We have, for example, Conor Carville, who won as a creative writer, who won the Patrick Kavanagh Prize, a great Irish poet, but also writes extensively on theorizations of Ireland in literature. So that area is one that I can genuinely say is very dear to us. Very yeah, it's important work. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Neil. Someone has asked, do you do annotations or write on theories on books such as A Streetcar Named Desire?
Yeah, no, we do. One of our first year options is American literature. American literature has always been an important part of our provision. In fact, originally we were a department of English and American literature specifically, but that remains very, very central to what we do. So American literature is taught in the first year. Williams is taught, and there are specialist second year modules in American literature and American nature writing. Many third year optional modules turn on American literature, and American literature is a really popular choice for dissertations as well. American literature is just yeah, it's fantastic. The thing about working in the department is it's kind of, I'm not an Americanist, yeah, but kind of like, I'm not a creative writing person, but you can't help but get caught up with it. And since working here, I've just become absolutely I'm looking over at my shelves now, and I like there is a whole wall of American literature, and every single, at least every other text has just completely blown me away and inspired me. Like in the creative writing, I've ended up doing a little bit of that as well. We all just get caught up in the work, and it's wonderful. But yeah, no, we will love to theorize Williams with you. It would be fantastic.
You've got lots and lots more questions. So another one is, how would you say independence and isolation are linked, and how do they differ from each other when escaping the gaze?
Oh, that's really interesting, isn't it? Independence and isolation. One of the things about independence and isolation, yeah, is that they always are ghosted by their others. Yeah, that to be independent, it's a strange thing, isn't it? Because there has to be something to be independent of. Yeah. Isolation, again, almost kind of less so. Yeah. But still requires an other and something kind of different. It's ghosted by that very thing. That's, I guess, this is what connects them. It's that idea that that's the whole drama, in a way, of the narration that has to stand outside of the door. That for something to be independent, yeah, you need it verified that it's kind of independent. Yeah, you need something outside of it. I'm gonna say reverse and then flip it again. I mean, the difference, I guess, you could think of it in terms of intention and will, about the difference between those things. I think that independence, in a way, doesn't require the other, and isolation is a thwarted desire for the other. But actually, I better stop there. But that is a really good question, because I could loop that for 12 hours. It's the question is, how can we think about an independent thing without calling upon the very otherness that independence would seem to foreclose? Such an interesting question.
Another one of the questions is, what would be your favourite theory on the Great Gatsby regarding the gays?
Oh, the Great Gatsby and Gays, very, very interesting. I think that if you were following the Great Gatsby and the gays, probably the big thing that's changed in the last 10 years in Gatsby criticism is race. And I haven't got access to, I can't remember it offhand, I should be able to. But there has been a number of really, really interesting essays and a big debate about race in Gatsby that links, I think, I know it's a popular thing at A level to kind of link Gatsby and Passing, yeah, the amazing book, and that those two gel well together on the ideas of culture and the visual. But it kind of turns, I think, on to what extent is race about performance. If one's race is linked to a sense of performability and therefore kind of visibility, is there a sense in which the notion of race as being an intrinsic, stable identity is kind of slightly questioned? If I was looking at kind of the gaze and visualness in Gatsby, yeah, have a search for journal essays on race. You'll find about 4 of them, and they all argue with each other, which is a really good thing. And that's the line I'd go down. I'm very interested in this because my most recent book is about constructions of kind of race.
Fabulous.
And so very much on my mind.
Thank you, Neil. There's actually a second question there, also about the Great Gatsby and kind of your favourite theories on that one, but I think you covered that one very, very nicely there. I just don't want people to have their questions missed.
Yeah.
There was another question that we also did get asked regarding, so within your presentation, you mentioned the gays within both books and film. Do you think this idea translates also to stage plays as well?
Yeah, it does. Stage plays are always really, really interesting on that, because stage plays are always, the thing to get with a stage play is kind of narration. And narration's kind of really tricky, because it seems like we are just looking at a scene that's happening, but actually a lot of the time what people are saying suggests that they are looking at particular things. Yeah. But I would say just very, very straightforwardly, something like The Women in Black, the kind of like super fun staging of that would be really great on just a really straightforward encounter with a gaze, I think. But actually, soliloquy, that moment, from the 16th century where truth becomes something individualized rather than kind of social. Yeah, it always still turns, and in certain productions, about a turning to the audience. Gaze and soliloquy is very kind of interesting as well, and that's something you could definitely look into.
Absolutely phenomenal. One of my favourite plays there, The Woman in Black.
That's great.
Absolutely amazing. Another couple of questions. Somebody, quite a straightforward question, this one. Somebody has said, can I use audiobooks instead of physical books? It's just the way that I prefer to read in order to be able to take in more.
Is that in what context?
Just in a general context, in able to, so they've said it is in a them being able to take in more reading.
I think I would say, yeah, outside of a seminar room where there might be, obviously we have loads of provision for sound, because not everyone can access things visually. Yeah, so that is there. But in general, the majority of our students will be encouraged to read texts in seminars. But outside of seminars, there is no big other. There is no one telling you what to do. Do what works for you. Yeah, take a lesson from Zizek and Kopchak. Yeah, don't listen. Yeah, if someone says, you know, that's not the way you do it, if it's working for you, it's working for you.
Yeah, it's one of my personal favorite ways to read. I am dyslexic, and the university is amazingly supportive of that. But as somebody who is a little bit older, it is one of my favorite ways to read because it means I get more and more in.
I should say at this point, I'm also dyslexic. So
Oh, amazing.
yeah, it's no, exactly. No, it's all to good. Yep.
Somebody, I don't know if you do. Somebody has asked, do you work with the Reading Scholars Program at all?
Yeah, I do. I was for 4 years. I was the Reading Scholars lead. And in fact, what I did in Reading Scholars was Ghost Story in a Box, which is something me and you worked on and developed.
Absolutely
We
amazing.
we created this resource to kind of teach ghost stories. We did it together by playing card games essentially, and lots of fun and stuff like that. Yeah, so I did that, and I'm kind of head of outreach, and so it will probably come back to me. Yeah.
I was going to say, would you reckon you'll be involved this year? Because a couple of students have asked if they may see you at it potentially.
If I'll tell you what, if I'm not, yeah, get them to ask whoever's in charge. It might be a colleague I know. It will be a colleague I know. I'll come down and say hello anyway. It's all right.
Fabulous. We've only got a couple of questions left, obviously. I don't want to take up. Somebody has asked a question that I think is really, really prominent. So, and it's all about kind of the university application. They've asked, do you read the personal statements? And also,
Yeah.
if you do read the personal statements, what would be your biggest piece of advice for somebody writing one?
Okay, so that's the advice bit is huge. We totally read the personal statements, and not only do we read the personal statements, we reply to every personal statement. Yeah. So we will, if you've had if you've applied to us, we will write to you back, and each of those is an individual letter. Yeah. One of the lovely things about that is that we kind of, when you arrive, you know, there's like 25 of us or whatever, and that 25, there will be around the person that initially made contact with you, which is amazing. The 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 big bit of advice is just like, I, it, I know this is soppy, but just be yourself, yeah. But also, don't. I would resist starting saying I've loved literature since I was a child, because that doesn't. That suggests kind of continuity, and it can be very important for us, but it doesn't tell us that much. Yeah. What is often really good is if you can communicate your love and interest for literature. Yeah. In any way. So really communicate to us why you like something, yeah, or the ideas in it, the ideas that inspired you. What do you want? What do you want to study? You know, when you study with us, what would you like to explore? Is there a sense of things that you don't know about? You know, that you can see potentially interesting. Yeah. We want to have a conversation about literature with you. Yeah. Or if you're doing a joint, literature and whatever it is and how they might combine.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about Reading is the fact that we reply to our personal statements. It's something that I very much personally love. And I'll just do the last two questions. So one of the last questions, somebody's asked your personal opinion, is English literature good, even if they're thinking about doing something like journalism or even potentially law?
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, one of the great things about English is great for employability. We've got a really high employability scores, and the thing about it is it's really transferable, especially with like the horrible threat of kind of AI coming in. What we really want is people that can people that can kind of think, people that can manage, people that can innovate, people that have got the necessary human skills. Purely technical skills are skills that increasingly can be replicated by machines. But the idea of being able to negotiate, the idea of kind of empathy, the idea of inspiration, yeah. And the idea fundamentally of what kids called negative capability, the idea of to be able to keep in one's head contrary things. yeah, and deal with impossibility and poetry. Yeah, that's our stuff. Yeah, and that can be transferred out. But you also, along with that, get all skills of archives and presentation and writing. We make you write like a dream. We can get you to speak very well. It's a really great subject for employability in general, and that's not just here at Reading. That's wherever you go. An English degree will really set you up. Yeah, if you really go for it. Yeah, and if you really go for it, it doesn't matter what level you're coming in at. Yeah, what you really want is to, you'll be working and be doing other things, but all the time you have, yeah, embrace the university life, embrace all the societies you can do, expand your understanding, but also expand your understanding within the subject. Yeah, wow yourself. Students often say, when they start up, what books should I be reading? The answer always is the books I haven't read. What we want our students to do is to come here, and we want them to be inspired. Yeah, and we want them to do the things we haven't done, make the connections we haven't made, build and grow our subject and the collective intelligence and creativity of the world. That's what we want.
And then the final question, which I think you've just led on to absolutely perfectly, is I've saved this to on to the last. Are there any books that you would personally recommend to read following your webinar? Would you like me to put your bibliography up from today's?
Yeah, I mean they kind of but they're kind of like they work, but they're kind of theory texts. They're all quite a lot of these are quite kind of demanding in that kind of way. What I would do in terms of what you should read to kind of think more, yeah, I genuinely mean this. Read something that interests you, yeah, and read a lot. I know it's really difficult with the A levels, and sometimes you just can't do it because there is so much demands on your time. But over the holidays, when you've got any kind of freedom, yeah, explore around, get used to picking things up, yeah, and never, never, never listen, yeah, to what you should be doing. Follow it where you can always ask advice, yeah, and if random, I tell you, if you want to read something really short, really groovy, yeah, Secret Sharer by Joseph Conrad. That's an odd one. Just about two dudes on a boat. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it's it just it's just so good. Yeah. Have a look. What else could I recommend? Green Tea by Sheridan Le Fanu. It's about a guy that drinks green tea, a vicar, and he starts hallucinating a demon monkey. That's good. Yeah. Loads of things. Yeah. But just I can recommend and do that. But the best thing is for you just to start reading anything and following your interests in that way. Yeah. But yeah, Green Tea by Sheridan Fanu, The Secret Show by Joseph Conrad. They'll be good kind of starters. Yeah, that's all fun. But it depends, doesn't it? It depends what you're kind of what you're interested in. Yeah, everyone's interested in different things. I'm an old goth, so I like a bit of the gothic. That's what I like. Yeah, but it will be different things for different people. Yeah. Um, if you're interested in Tennessee Williams, think about other playwrights that are working at that time. Think about exploring the Southern Gothic. Yeah. Oh, I've got to say the other thing that is always good. Shirley Jackson. Yeah. Read some Shirley Jackson short stories. Yeah, they're really good.
Amazing, and thank you so much again, Neil. Thank you everybody for attending today. Neil, as always, you have
Yeah,
been
thank you.
absolutely phenomenal, and I can personally say that I've enjoyed it immensely. If you are interested in finding out more about English literature here at the University of Reading, there is the QR code on the screen now. And if you do want to visit us to see one of our campus visits or even our open days, you can also scan that QR code. If you do have any questions today following the webinar and you think, oh, I haven't had a chance to ask that, if you follow the Explore English Literature QR code, you can ask us a question on one of our web pages that comes directly through to the team, and we will be able to ask Neil for you and get an answer back to you. But finally, a huge thank you from the University of Reading and a huge thank you to you, Neil. It has been amazing.
Thanks to everyone. Yeah, see you soon. Bye bye.